All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room. Here we talk about everything that's related to the biggest global event to have occurred in human history, and that is World War II. Here we talk about the figureheads who play a tremendous role in shaping society, from the emperors and the dictators to the foot soldiers and the citizens like yourself and I. Glad you all can make it tonight. I'm your gracious host, Sigma Jones. My co host, Mr. Paul Bryan, is in the back end, so I will be breaking him up in a few minutes. Hope you guys are doing well. Know it's a Saturday night and there's still a lot that's going on and everything, but glad you're able to come through and listen in. And even on the replay, definitely appreciate the love and support. So, before I get started, I got an email from an anonymous person a while back. Excuse me. And this individual is tuning in to the War Room series and all. And for those who have been listening in, lately we've been talking about the early years of World War II, or excuse me, the early years of Adolf Hitler. My bad. And so this individual asked me, why are we focusing on Adolf Hitler and haven't started to talk on other figureheads? And it's an interesting question. And so I figured, you know what? Maybe I should give a little bit more background into what this series is about. JJ Wilson, good to see you, sir. And also shout out to Lamont Ellis. But the thing is this, I like to give an analogy when it comes down to playing a game of chess. Before you start playing the game, as far as chess and everything, you first need to remember what are the players on the board, i.e., the pieces that you will be utilizing. You need to understand what they are, what moves they make, and how they can help you in strategizing your plan. Well, the same holds true to this series. Before we actually get into the main events of World War II, the first thing we got to do is talk about the guys who will play a major role in how the events come about. We need to understand their personal life, understand their background, understand their personalities and psychology, so that when we start getting into the meat and potatoes of their actions during the major global events of World War II, then we're able to understand why they made that decision and what other aspects they could use to go in different directions. And so, don't get me wrong, we're pretty much almost done as far as with Hitler's early years leading up to World War One. And then from there, we'll start branching off to other figureheads as well. But I really want people, and I'm sure my co hosts would agree to this as well. I really want people to understand these particular individuals that we're going to be highlighting. And believe me, even with Adolf Hitler, we're going to be highlighting his inner circle. So we're going to be doing episodes on those particular characters. And believe me, for a lot of them, it's going to be more than just one episode. And even in this case of Hitler, this is just part three. We still got major events we got to get into, excuse me, as far as his rise into the Third Reich. So, for those who are just curious as to why we're, so to speak, talking on Adolf Hitler and everything, it's mainly just to give a good, solid foundation into this series. And also, from an educational standpoint, we need to understand why these particular individuals play a major role, not only back in World War II, but even in today's modern time. Even for myself, there's some things about Hitler that, after digging more into his background, it actually sheds some light into his ways of thinking that, on some occasions, I can actually relate to. Doesn't mean that I condone the things that he's done. Definitely not. But it helps to give a more human side to a major player, not just him, but with other individuals that we're going to be talking about during this great human event that has yet to be topped off as the number one most influential time in human civilization. So that's enough with my preliminary talk and everything. So without further ado, allow me to break up my co-host, Mr. Paul Bryant, aka the light skinned sellout. How's it going, good sir?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing really good. Doing really good. I have to say, and I know this is outside of our stream and everything, but I had a chance to go over to Anon Black Man and Light Skin Motivation, and I have to say, their interview with the brother that did his book,
Mhm.
it is a very enlightening stream that I've been on. And I have to say, even though myself, I'm not light skinned, but a lot of the talking points that they were sharing, their stories and everything, it was easy for me to relate to. So
Mm.
I have to say, that was an awesome stream just to go there for the first time.
Yeah, you know what? I am actually glad that you had a chance to excuse me. I'm glad that you had a chance to make it on over there because first and foremost, it's not the Manosphere, it's not the Ebony sector of YouTube, it's none of that nonsense. So, you know, unfortunately some of that will creep in, but the effort is definitely made to separate from that nonsense, to look at things from a different perspective. Okay, it's all about taking a rational approach and looking at different mindsets and different things that you're not going to hear about, things that are not thought of in wider ebony American culture and society. So, as a person like yourself and as a person like myself, we exist outside of the black box, and we do not subscribe to any of those hive mind lines of thought. So I'm glad that you enjoyed your first time there, and hopefully you'll come through. And if you feel so motivated to contribute, by all means do so, because as you saw, it's all about differing thoughts and opinions that are not shared by the hive mind.
That's absolutely true. And honestly, just being in that space in and of itself, like you said, is totally different from the run of the mill manosphere type of streams and everything. And people actually talk about real life experience. And what I mean by that is, they're not stuck on the woe is me, we got to think like everybody else and whatnot. No, they actually give their input. And even for the most part, for what I witnessed there, everybody was in agreement that, what, there's some things that needs to be separated from the hive mind. And the thing about it too is, even within this series, like I was trying to explain to the anonymous person in the email, this series is helping to highlight some of the things that we're seeing today that can be traced back to the ripple effects of World War II. And even going back to that time frame, you can look to see what it is from that history that you can apply today. And for me, the stream that I just came on pretty much highlight those talking points that, to me, was just awesome.
Exactly. So, it's of interest that either you or me have to explain this every single stream. It's not about glorification of war. We are not discussing the morality of war or what was done by any of the parties involved in that war. There's plenty of that to go around. Case in point, Japanese internment by the United States, but I digress.
Mm-hmm.
What we are discussing is what both of us feel is the most influential act globally of the last 100 years, and how the choices of a few individuals changed the world because they were in a position where their thoughts and their actions led others to action. So these few individuals were responsible for reshaping this planet we all live on. So, we're taking the opportunity to dissect and maybe even deconstruct and destroy many of the narratives that we've all been taught from childbirth. Because as the old saying goes, to the victor to the victor go the spoils, but also history is written by the victors. So there are many viewpoints and many truths that have been hidden because one side lost or one side won. So we are looking at everything and laying it all out. Arguments for morality can certainly be had at a later date, but we are elevating our thinking here and looking at things from a perspective of dispassionate, rational observation.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key thing that needs to be emphasized going forward for any newcomer that's, listening in now or going to be listening on the replay. This does not require having your emotions on your sleeve. This requires putting your emotions aside and thinking logically from both sides of this particular event, the winners and the losers, and seeing what is it about their personality and their psychology have brought them to this viewpoint. And I can honestly say, even before I started this series, I have always kind of looked at Hitler as not the big bad wolf as history would try to put him out to be. And the
Mhm.
more I dug in to read about his early childhood, and we're going to get in more into his time in World War One, it kind of removes the peel of a monster and actually gives him more human traits. And the beauty about it is he's not the only one. There's going to be so many other characters who history has painted them a picture as being monsters, but they all have human traits. And likewise, there will be characters who were painted as superheroes and all, but deep down, they too had some hidden dark traits.
It's funny that you bring that up because over the last 100 years of any name, what's the one name more than any that has been burnished into history as being the ultimate monster? Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Again, neither of us are condoning anything that he did during the war. But the funny thing is, if you study history, and for those who are unawares, my particular focus is more so Germany, and Brother Sigma Jones focus. What I'm saying is here is that I am much more well versed in Germany than he is, and he is much more well versed in Japan than I am. So the thing is this: the actual monsters were Reinhard Heydrich and Joseph Goebbels. They were monsters. They were monsters. Hitler was not the person that you think he was. And I'm not, again, not condoning anything that he did. Hitler greenlit a lot of things that were brought to him. So, who is the actual monster? The person who creates or thinks up of atrocities, or the person who says, okay, sounds good, let's Let's run with it. Now, again, we can have the moral argument, but the more a person researches Adolf Hitler and looks at the history, there's a lot of truths and out lies, and maybe there's a lot of lessons to be learned how a person gets to the position that they are, because Adolf Hitler did not get to where he was by being a monster. He got to be where he was, one, by being a charming manipulator, and that also speaks to where he came from. So your idea and knowledge about who he was will be better informed by studying his history and his upbringing and his early years and where he came from. So as we deconstruct that, as we have in these previous streams, there's a lot to be learned here. And then, as you just said, a lot of those names, everyone knows the name Adolf Hitler, but no one knows Reinhard Heydrich. He's the one who devised and curated and ran the final solution. So that's the monster.
Absolutely. And again, right now we're just mainly talking the backgrounds of some of the major figureheads. Just wait until we start getting into more of the supporting cast, because even their backgrounds before we actually get into the actual events of World War II, you're going to really see how deeply troubled, I would say, a lot of their characters are. I mean, even on the side of Japan and everything, um, there is some background on the likes of Hideki Tojo
Mm.
that most people would probably not think of him in a certain light, even though in some cases he had a sense of compassion. And there are even others who, were kind of seen as more stable somewhat on the outside, but once you kind of read up on how they how their mindset was transformed, it's just like wow, it's definitely some hidden truths that it takes more than just reading a book and just skimming over. No, you actually have to read up more on these individuals and look at their autobiographies, which one thing for sure in this series, we will be looking at some live footages of these particular characters that they were recorded in history. So that way it goes along with what we're talking about.
It's funny that you say that because I'm seeing some comments here in the chat. There were two individuals around and during this very same time period, and I know it's further on down the line, but Winston Churchill was nowhere near the angel that history paints him as.
Oh,
No
yes.
angel. That was a
Oh,
vet. Sorry.
oh
Go
no,
ahead.
I was just agreeing to exactly what you're saying. And in fact, he's actually up next. Once we take a break from Hitler as far as his events after World War I, we're going to be talking about his opponent from across the way, which is Churchill, Winston Churchill. And like you just said, his character was definitely not no Boy Scout material.
Let's just put it like this. For those who are unawares, Winston Churchill and Governor George Wallace and David Duke would all be golfing buddies. I'll leave that there. And also a history paints Mahatma Gandhi as the paragon of virtue. He hated ebony people. I'll leave that there.
Exactly. So let's kind of recap as far as where we left off. So, on the previous episode, we talked a little bit about Hitler's time in Vienna and how he was still kind of recovering from the death of his mother. What was interesting in the last episode was the fact that we got more in depth into his psychology, and we looked at the fact that he was an individual who he may not have had the best skill sets at the time as far as like his artistic skills and everything. He actually had many opportunities to better himself per se in the right direction, as far as making money, as far as networking with the right people and all. And yet his own upbringing pretty much has I guess you could say handicapped him, excuse me, to the point to where he just was just a lazy bum. And then as he start to get more involved into politics, he suddenly has this sense of the world owes me because of my faults, rather than, you know, I can actually go and make something of myself. In other words, it's the typical notion of I'm going to blame certain aspects of society for my shortcomings.
Very much so. Very much so. Because you see how, and it's funny because he clearly, Adolf clearly did that. So one has to wonder, did, did that stem from what he saw in his childhood? So he saw his stepmother treat his stepbrothers and sisters better than he was. He saw his father physically abuse his mom. He saw his father physically abuse his stepmom. So could that have possibly contributed to that mindset, as with the all of the other behaviors that we've all already explored with Adolf? So he he was a rebel against his father's will, which is the cornerstone of German culture and society to this day, by the way. And when he went to uh, he wanted to go into the seminary, but he failed at that. He wanted to be an artist, but he was rejected from that. So you see how all of these things shape and they molded this man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where it now leads up to where we at now, because we talked about how Hitler had this dream of getting into the Austrian army at one point in time, but when he had his evaluation, they deemed him unsuitable from a physical standpoint of being a soldier. And so that too kind of threw him into a depressive state, because he wanted to really do his he really wanted to serve, so to speak, Austria and Germany. But then on the first try, the army generals or the recruiters just felt like, nah, he doesn't have the makings to be a general, or excuse me, a soldier, which pretty much highlights the fact that his military experience, especially in the beginning,
Mhm.
definitely was not like a golden track record that most generals would have.
Absolutely not, because he was his his military record was lackluster at best, and that's being kind. He absolutely had no future in the military.
Very true. Very true. So let's go ahead and dive right into this to see what his military history pretty much was summed up. And pretty much all of it comes straight from World War One. So this is the section that we left off, and we'll continue. So it starts off with this. It says Adolf Hitler had refused twice to respond to letters calling him to join the Austro-Hungarian army. However, he did attend a third call and reported to the army office in Salzburg in the summer of 1913. Hitler was bitterly upset when, after being medically examined, he was declared unfit on account of, quote, general physical debility. So, right there, it just kind of reiterates what we were just talking about from the previous section, where he was hoping to enlist on the first try, and the recruiters and the generals was like, nah, he just doesn't have that body type, so to speak, or that presence to be a soldier. And it definitely took a knock on his psychology based on our last recap. Excuse me. All right. And so, Edward
Right.
Bailey, good to see you, sir. Go ahead, go right ahead.
No. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Alrighty. And so next it says the outbreak of the First World War provided him with an opportunity for a fresh start. It was a chance for him to become involved in proving that Germany was superior to other European countries. Hitler claimed that when he heard the news of war, quote, I was overcome with impetuous enthusiasm and falling on my knees, wholeheartedly thanked heaven that I had been granted that happiness to live at this time. What a man wants is what he hopes and believes. The overwhelming majority of the nation had long been wary of the internally uncertain state of affairs. Thus, it was only too understandable that they no longer believed in a peaceful conclusion of the Austro-Serbian conflict, but I hoped for the final settlement. I too was one of these millions. Rejecting the idea of fighting for Austria, Hitler volunteered for the German army. Hitler recalled receiving a letter replying to his application. Quote, I opened the document with trembling hands. No words of mine could describe the satisfaction I felt. Within a few days, I was wearing that uniform, which I was not to put off again for nearly 6 years. So here we have, he's finally being called up for service as the World War breaks out. And he gets a chance now to serve in the German army. And as you can tell from that last statement, excuse me, he he finally at one point in time found his purpose in life based on his statements of finally serving his country.
Yeah. I find it funny that he wants to serve his country in the German army, but most people don't know this. Adolf Hitler wasn't German. He was Austrian. Now,
Mmm.
for most people, that's a distinction without a difference because Austria is part of the former German Empire. They speak the same language. It's mostly the same culture. Culture is slightly different. It, I would say, it's like the United States and Texas because we all know Texas is like it's like its own place. But the point that I'm trying to drive home here is rejection, because that is a common theme through his early years, even up into his military career during World War One. From a young
Mm-hmm.
child to his military career, rejection, failure, rejection, failure. Everything that he has done, and he rebelled against his father because his father was ab- abusive towards him as well as his mom. So he rebelled against him. But yet he failed, or he had next to no success in everything that he actually chose to do of his own volition. So it's funny how these things shape that man going forward.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up too about how he's originally an Austrian, even though the German Empire had absorbed Austria's territory before the war broke out. And I know on the first episode, we actually looked at a map of what Eastern Europe looked like before and after the Treaty of Versailles. And so for Hitler, during this time frame, um, even though the country hasn't like broken off just yet, he felt like he was truly part of Germany.
Hmm.
Even though, even between the Germans and the thin Austrians at the time, there was distinction as far as the phenotypes as well.
Hmm. Absolutely. But when I say Austria is a part of the former German Empire, I'm going back. I'm going back through time. All the way back to when before they were even called Germans, when they were called the Gauls, and they were called the Goths. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because even the the Norse people and Scandinavia, all those peoples, they originally come from what we now call the Germanic peoples. But I digress. So that's why Austria and Germany both speak the same exact language, and cultures are basically the same. But there is still a distinction. You're Austrian or you are German, even though you speak the same language. It's mostly the same culture, but there are cultural differences. So again, I find it of interest that he chose to adopt Germany instead of Austria. Now, granted, he did grow up in Germany, but he did live in Austria until at least he was what, 6 or 7 before his father left.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he knows this and he understands this. That's the country of his birth. So it's not something that he did not remember. That those were his formative years. And he himself even said he saw no possibility of joining the Austrian army, so he joined the German army.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's kind of dive more into this. So it says here, Hitler joined the first company of the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. Another volunteer in the same regiment was, drumroll please, Rudolf Hess. And before I continue,
His former right
I'm
hand
I'm
man.
definitely going. Yep, I'm gonna have fun when we talk about Rudolf Hess' background because before you can understand his actions during World War II, you first got to understand him as a person, which anybody who has done any biography read on Rudolf Hess, they will all conclude he is a very interesting person.
He is the ultimate sycophant.
Absolutely. So just keep in mind, this is his first encounter, Adolf Hitler and Rudolf Hess. But definitely, as we go more into his rise to the Third Reich, you will be seeing his name, Rudolf Hess, pretty often. So, all right. So it says another volunteer in the same regiment was Rudolf Hess, and the regimental clerk was Sergeant Max Amann. After initial training in Munich, Hitler arrived on the Western Front on the 21st of October 1914, where his regiment took part in the Battle of Ypres. It has been claimed that Hitler's regiment was reduced from 3,600 to 611 men during this first period of fighting. Hitler wrote home, quote, "That life is a constant, horrible struggle." According to a few members of the regiment, Hans Min, Hitler, like all those who survived the battle, was promoted to the rank of Lance Corporal. It says Adolf Hitler explained what life was like on the front line in a letter to a friend back in October 1914. Quote, "Out there, the first shrapnel were flying over us, bursting at the edge of the woods and tearing apart the trees like so much brushwood. We looked on curiously. We had no real idea of the danger. None of us were afraid. We swarmed out and chased across the fields to a little farm. To left and right, the shrapnel were bursting, and in between the English bullets sang. But we paid no attention. For 10 minutes we lay there, and then we were again ordered forward. I was way out in front, ahead of our squad. Squad leader Stover had been hit. Good God, I had barely time to think. Now things are starting. But since we were in the open, we had to dash forward. The captain was at the head. The first of our men began to fall. The English had set up machine guns. We threw ourselves down and crawled slowly forward through a gutter. From time to time, a man was hit and couldn't go on, and the whole column was stuck. Then we had to lift the man out of the ditch. We kept crawling until the ditch stopped. Then we were in the open field again. We ran 15 or 20 yards. Then we came to a big pool of water. One after another, we splashed into it, took cover, and caught our breath. But it was no place to lie still. So we dashed out quick and double quick to a forest that lay about 100 yards ahead of us. There, we found each other after a while, but the woods were beginning to look pretty thin. So I know that's kind of a tough imagery to kind of get at the type of warfare that was going on during World War One. But to kind of give an audience an idea, World War One pretty much was won and lost in the trenches. And these trenches were like labyrinths that took on miles upon miles of infrastructure. And keep in mind, this is well before tanks started to come around. The airplane idea was starting to be birthed into reality and all. So a lot of this fighting was literally done on foot and on horseback. And so what Hitler was describing is the tactic of, you get to one position, you stayed there, try to, shoot as much of the enemy as you could see, and then try to move to the next position, and you keep building a trench and a trench until you set up kind of like a borderline between the enemy and yourself. And in this case, whoever lost the most men were able to move forward from that point.
Yeah, it was absolutely brutal, and uh, war. The military is greatest. The military, unfortunately, historically, has been the greatest advancement of technology on this planet, and war has pushed technology farther than anything else in our history. So, World War One, with all that trench warfare, saw the creation of biological and chemical weapons. Mustard gas and a few other weapons. Mustard gas being the most famous, but it's not the only chemical or biological weapon that was created during the war.
Mm-hmm.
So air airplanes were used more toward the end of the war, and as as you said, tanks again more toward the end of the war, if there were any at all on the battlefield. Trench warfare, fighting for inches, digging trenches, dug in for days on end, weeks on end, fighting wars of attrition on a set battlefield. It was brutal.
Absolutely. And to me, it is very hard to give that sort of analogy as far as that type of warfare unless you were there, or you may have gotten a few training ideas during that time. Because back then, even though the rifle has been around for years, you know, not many men were good marksmen until later on when they started to understand the technology behind it. And so you can only imagine during that time frame, you have these bullets that were flying left and right, and some would hit their targets, and others, there were many cases um during this time frame, World War One, that there were a lot of friendly fires because guys were just understanding how this new type of warfare was being brought as far as trench warfare.
Absolutely, and you have to remember there are many things that even if you're a you even if you're not familiar with military technology. Look at what did not exist. No radios. They didn't have radios. They didn't have
Mm-hmm.
lines of communication. Lines of communication were literally people running messages back and forth, either on foot or on horse. That was literally it. No radar, no body armor, um, shells. I mean, it was literally pistols and rifles, and even I cannons. But I don't want to say like old wild west cannons, but like the beginnings of light artillery
Mm-hmm.
they had, and that was it. That's all they had. So imagine trying to fight a war like that. Very difficult.
Absolutely. And speaking of, the foot soldier having to relay the message and everything, this is where we actually now start to see Hitler's involvement as he progressed more into this war. So the next paragraph actually kind of gives that more insight. So it says Hitler was assigned on the 9th of November as an orderly, which today is a dispatch runner. His task was a runner whose job was to carry messages between the front line and the regimental headquarters, 3 kilometers away, just like Mr. Bryan said. Although he was not actually in the trenches, it was a dangerous job. On one day alone, 3 out of 8 of the regiment's dispatch runners were killed, and another one was wounded.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's just in one day. I'd just like to know who all survived by the end of the week.
Yeah, that's one of those things where they say, "Okay, you're a dispatch runner." You're like, "Oh, me? No, no, I don't want that job. I don't want that job at all."
It is funny how in today's and I'll put it more so towards the U.S. military. You know, when a person decides they want to join the military, they have a little bit of freedom to decide what type of infantry or regime or any other type of position within the military they want to go through. Whereas in this day and time, especially during World War I and even going into World War II, whatever position they gave you, that was you.
That
No
was it.
if yeah, that no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You had to do the job. So like you said, I can only imagine, the captain or the lieutenant comes to you and say, "Hey, starting today, you're the dispatch runner," and you already know at least 2 of those guys got killed that day.
I mean, damn,
Yeah.
it's bad enough you're already in the military. You're already in a war, a real war, and then your superior officer comes and tells you that, okay, you have now been assigned a job that has a 45% death rate on a daily basis. Yeah, okay.
Hey, it's all part of war.
Right.
Ain't
Hey,
no.
that's right. Right.
Alrighty. So it says on the 2nd of December, Hitler was presented with the Iron Cross Second Class, one of 4 dispatch runners in his regiment to receive the honor. It was, he said, quote, the happiest day of my life. It is significant that the fact he was a dispatch runner was omitted from Mein Kampf. This was probably because most soldiers saw the job as a shirker's post.
There's that theme again.
Mm-hmm.
Very little success, failure, or rejection.
Oh, man. Well, it's interesting. Like I just said, when you read up on Mein Kampf. Hitler does talk about his time in the war, the first war, but it does not mention at all about his position as a dispatch runner. And so, like you said, that's a clue right there that for him, it was most important to show imagery, to show that he was actually some sort of foot soldier with a gun and he was actually fighting on the front lines and everything, when in actuality, he was just a glorified messenger boy.
Uh, um, I'm laughing because you're 100% right. That's exactly what he was. He was a glorified messenger boy. And if you look at it, when he commissioned Hugo Boss to design the uniforms for the Nazi Party and for all three branches of the German military, the uniform for the Nazi Party, it was an actual uniform that looked like a military uniform. That's
Mm, interesting. So next it says here, Adolf Hitler liked being in the army. For the first time, he was part of a group that was fighting for a common goal. Hitler also liked the excitement of fighting in a war. Although fairly cautious in his actions, he did not mind risking his life and impressed his commanding officers for volunteering for dangerous missions. However, his fellow soldiers describe him as odd and peculiar. One soldier from his regiment, Hans Min, claimed that Hitler was an isolated figure who spent long periods of time sitting in the corner holding his head in silence. Then all of a sudden, Min claimed, he would jump up and make a speech. These outbursts were usually attacks on Jews and Marxists, who Hitler claimed were undermining the war effort. I, after reading this statement, I think to myself, okay, imagine you're taking a break from the war. You're in whatever type of room or you're outside around a campfire with your fellow soldiers and everything. And there's one particular soldier who is just keeping to himself, doesn't talk much. You would think that, he was a mute. But then all of a sudden, as the conversation between you and the other soldiers are getting good, this dude just suddenly breaks out and starts going on a diatribe about, so to speak, the war effort is being controlled by the Marxists and the liberals and all these other groups that are, so to speak, undermining all the efforts and everything. And you're taken aback like, when did this guy been talking this?
sounds a lot like certain sounds a lot like a lot of people and quote unquote leaders from a certain demographic in America. But I digress.
Oh, you know what? I had a feeling that it was gonna go in that direction, but I was like, you know what? This is why this is why I love this series. Because if you are a brother, right now, if you're reading the back end of this particular episode and the previous episode, and in fact to kind of highlight the things that I'm talking about, brother, I'm confused left this comment in earlier in the chat where he says Hitler was just the original woe is me Pookie. And I had to literally like mute myself and kind of get out of my chair because at this point in time, this is exactly the imagery that I'm getting.
Uh, Hitler had a lot of issues, a lot of issues, a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of issues, a lot of daddy issues, a lot of problems growing up. He was, you know what? You and I have both come to the conclusion by every possible metric. I think it's possible to say Adolf was at least a sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't understand the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. So, a sociopath is a person who has difficulty interacting with other people in social situations.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a spectrum. So, it depends on where along that spectrum you as the individual falls. So, I think it's pretty clear. Adolf was a sociopath. He definitely had issues interacting with others.
Absolutely. And this here just kind of highlights that where, you know, he was well liked by his superiors and all, because he's going out there and literally putting his life on the line. Don't know if he'll make it back and everything. But then his fellow soldiers, the men that you usually interact with on a regular basis, it was just like there was definitely some hidden social cues that he just couldn't pick up on. And I can only imagine, when they say he would have these outbursts and everything, that a lot of the soldiers will look at him and probably like thinking to themselves, you know, could you kind of be on topic? And if so, why you gotta raise your voice? Why you gotta make a scene? That like the saying goes, there's a time and place for everything. But kind of reading up on this, it sounds to me like you just never know when this man, so to speak, 1 hour quiet as a mouse, not saying anything, keep it to himself. And then the next hour, dude is hopping mad, turning red, talking about the ills of the world and everything. And you're just like, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but something's wrong.
Oh man, I have to give a shout out to one David Carroll, who has said a certain demographic as a group, as a mass collective group, needs therapy because there are many undiagnosed mental and emotional issues and problems.
Fact.
And I will say this because we're staying straight on our topic, but mass self delusion. So, staying back on our topic, I'm going to stay here. It just goes to show when looking, seeing the effects of sociopathic behavior and how undiagnosed mental and emotional issues can affect a person and how they can shape that person. So, you see it in America amongst a certain demographic. That's on a macrocosm. On a microcosm, you're looking how it affected one individual. Problem here is this one individual became the head of a nation state.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So check out this next excerpt, and I think this will also kind of give some deeper psychological damage in regards to Hitler's social cues. So it says a close friend, Ernest Homstangl, claims that Hitler was the victim of sexual bullying while in the army. Quote, old army comrades who had seen him in the wash house had noted that his private parts were almost freakishly underdeveloped, and he doubtless had some sense of shame about displaying himself. It seemed to me that this must have all been part of the underlying complex in his physical relations, which was compensated for by the terrifying urge for domination expressed in the fields of politics. He was nicknamed Monk because of his lack of interest in women. Check this out. When one of the soldiers asked him, "Haven't you ever loved a girl?" Hitler replied, "I never had time for anything like that, and I'll never get round to it."
Oh, he was a cuck who suffered from penis envy.
My
Wow.
my friend, and I'm gonna digress a little bit, but we're gonna stay on track.
Okay.
But there's a saying goes that when an individual tries to project his manliness, usually that's a telltale sign
Yep.
he's lacking in that area.
Oh my God. I have I have rejected that my entire life on so many grounds. But as I got older, I got to a point, you know what? There's a lot of truth in those statements. There's a lot of validity in those statements.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think that, oh, he's compensating for something. Get out of here. You're jealous. You're being a hater, or you yourself were rejected, so now you're projecting. No, there is a lot of truth in those statements.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad. Wow.
Yeah, and to be, because we got to remember, this is going on during the time that Hitler is in his 20s at this point in stage, and so usually most young men who are in their early 20s, late teens, coming up in that development, they should already be thinking about the opposite sex.
You're
Nothing
a
wrong with that.
raging hormone monster. You are basically a walking hard on.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
I was. So.
Oh, believe me, the early 20s wasn't too long for me too, and I remember, especially, my first year being in college and everything, it was just like, man, I was in a candy store and where's the buffet? But this here, yeah, this here definitely kind of highlights to where, because it has been said before that, you know, Hitler felt like he was incompetent. And because of that, he had this urge to prove himself even more so, not only to other men, but women too, because he felt like he he wasn't the specimen that females would look for. And that's why that last statement, when a soldier asked him, Hitler, have you ever loved a girl before? Have you ever had a crush and everything? And then Hitler replies, I've never had that before, and most likely I never will.
Wow.
That's an individual we can already say he was definitely psychologically damaged from his childhood. But now, oh, go ahead.
When you said that, I caught a flash to Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs dancing, saying it puts the lotion on its skin. I don't mean to laugh, but wow, man. Mm, mm. Let me stop, because it's a very serious matter. because the man's sociopathic behavior led to what history has given us. But we see this this comes back to that person who sent you that email, who shall remain nameless. But this this is why this series is so it has importance for the fact
Mm-hmm.
that when as we look at these people, they're human people, and as we explore the human motivations and the human factors behind what they did, much becomes revealed about these people because you know very few of them were actual monsters, and there will be some actual monsters, but he wasn't. The more and more you learn about this man, you really begin to understand how he was a tragic victim of unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. And even from the standpoint of, physical circumstances, you know, I know we talk about there's some things of a man that's, of his pride and everything. When a man's pride has been shocked, I would say, it could definitely, if he's not motivated in the right way, it could definitely send him down a deep spiral. And if he's not a sociopath already, it can easily go towards that type of narcissistic thinking.
Hmm.
And so, as you can see, it is just at this point in time, Hitler is slowly becoming a wrecking ball of emotions. And, all of it is going to start accumulating time and time and time until eventually the man is going to be in the right position to unleash that wrecking ball on the entire world. And this is, like you just pointed out earlier, this is why we are looking at his background. Because to me, before you can understand his actions, you need to understand how did he get there.
Exactly, pure facts, because a lot of people have looked at the war from 10,000 different ways, and some of the very smartest and brightest people have all consistently come to the same conclusion. Germany should have won that war. They had the one war dead to rights. Germany lost that war because Adolf Hitler made emotional decisions at key moments, which led to them losing the war. And the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest emotional decision was when he went to Admiral Rader, and Admiral Rader asked him, "What do you need to give me the fighting force that I want to conquer the world? I need 5 more years to give you the fleet that you want me to build." He looked at him and said, "I'll give you your 5 years." 3 months later, he's invading Poland, and rest is history. And
Yep.
even then, when he didn't have the Navy that Admiral Rader said he needed to win the war, Germany still should have won that war. But Hitler's emotional decisions at key moments is what lost them that war.
Absolutely. And believe me, Hitler's not the only big leader, world leader, that will make such unconsequential decisions like that. But as the audience will see, when we get to that point, when we get to why Hitler just off of emotions go about that type of thinking, we can trace it all back to this particular part. And another thing too, and I was just reading this the other day, and this is going into the further down the road as we get more into World War II and everything. But this happened right after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And the analysts were examining Hitler's motives and moves during those days after Pearl Harbor. Had Hitler not declared war on the United States and just simply relayed a message that we don't condone what the Japanese have done, we sympathize with the Americans, and if the Americans need any help in a certain way, we can send some resources to them and all. If Hitler does something even remotely similar like that, many analysts believe Hitler would have probably had an easier battle just focusing on Britain alone.
And you know, the funny thing about that is Hitler made his decision to because he did not give Admiral Rader the 5 years to build Plan Z fleet that
Mm-hmm.
he Hitler resorted to commercial raiding. So Britain had no choice but to ask America to help out and get involved in the war. And it's funny, even with that, Admiral Dönitz said, use the U-boats, use the Wolfpack. He waited before he started to use the U-boats, and then they had a devastating difference. But even then, Hitler decides he wants to go off and invade Russia. And once he did that, that was the beginning of the end. Because up until that point, they were winning the war by
Mm-hmm.
every available metric. But you can't fight a war on two fronts, and as we know, the rest is history. So it was only a matter of
Yep, absolutely. So, moving on from that particular excerpt, it says Hansmann, a fellow dispatch runner, has claimed that Ernest Schmitz and Hitler had a sexual relationship. Quote, we noticed that he, meaning Hitler, never looked at a woman. We suspected him of homosexuality right away because he was known to be abnormal in any case. He was extremely eccentric and displayed womanish characteristics, which tended in that direction. He never had a firm objective, nor any kind of firm beliefs. In 1915, we were billeted in the Le Fabre brewery at Furness. We slept in the hay. Hitler was bedded down at night with Schmidt, his male whore. We heard a rustling in the hay. Then someone switched on his electric flashlight and growled, take a look at those Nancy boys. I myself took no further interest in the matter. Alrighty, so I know this one is probably a little bit touchy, as in this day environment, there are some aspects that we will kind of tread lightly on and I talk about. But one thing that I can highlight from this point of view, it is well known that logic has always been seen as a male attribute, and emotions have always been seen as a female attribute.
right.
Therefore, when a man, as I would say, wears his emotions on his sleeve, it will kind of have people think of him in that regard. And I'll tread at that.
Well, you know, the thing is this, right? a lot of people, a lot of people mistake passion for emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be very passionate about something but very logical and rational in your approach. And that gets confused with people who are emotional and they are illogical and irrational. Okay, so a lot of people are very emotional and they think that they're just passionate. No, you're not passionate, you're emotional. And there are a lot of men who are very emotional, and that is a feminine trait because men lead towards logical, rational thinking. Women lead towards emotional thinking. That's your yin and your yang. They're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to coexist in balance. So when you have a man who is more emotional than rational, well, you tend to get things like spheres and communitize and all other kind of foolishness. So come on, bro. You threw the bait my way. You had to know I was gonna bite.
I knew it, but I didn't know you was gonna bite hard on that thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I have
but
to
but
keep it down. I have to keep it straight and narrow. Sorry.
but no, you're absolutely correct because, like you just said, there is nothing wrong with having passion. And again, we're not saying men should not have emotions and everything because believe me, not expressing your emotions is also detrimental to your health as well. So
Yes.
there's a time and place for that. But like you rightfully pointed out, when a man is constantly, keyword constantly, making decisions based on emotions, that's where you can't really trust him when it comes to very important decisions. And we're talking stuff like business decisions, military decisions, social decisions, family decisions.
Yep.
A lot of these aspects requires logic. And if you're an individual who can't put your emotions aside for a bit to make a logical decisions and stick to those decisions, that's the key thing too. Sticking to them and not just I feel like this one day, but the next day I change my mind and everything. That is not masculine. I'm just honest. It's just not.
Oh, so would that include being upset at a certain demographic of woman, and then you hear a certain moniker say, "Oh, I don't know, starts with an S, has another S, and ends in an M," and then you proclaim that that's your lifestyle. Yet, no, only thing that you do is just say, "I hate this type of woman. I hate this type of woman."
Ooh boy, we definitely going deep the rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's stay away from that. So, see, the thing is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
A thorough study of one Mr. Adolf Hitler highlights the problem of a man who is emotional because men are inherently logical and rational. So a man who is emotional is inherently now out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
All of his thinking is now clouded. All of his thinking is now controlled by the all of his thinking is now controlled by emotional arguments and emotional thinking. And as we just said, men are inherently logical. And we know there are only two genders, so we know what the other gender is. So when your thoughts and your actions are governed by emotion, you tend to make irrational decisions and you're not thinking clearly. And nothing that you do, you cannot build things that are solid. A high rise has to be built on a solid foundation. You cannot build on a foundation of quicksand. And that's what emotion is. See, emotion needs the structure and logic, the structure and discipline of logic to harness it, focus it, guide it, direct it, and control it. That's your yin and your yang. See, so now I've gone to the other end. Now I'm going a bit more esoteric. Right? I digress. We will stay straight and narrow.
Absolutely. And to even highlight that, because that was a great analogy as far as building a solid foundation from a skyscraper point of view. I like, as I mentioned earlier, about playing a game of chess. First and foremost, if you don't know how to play chess, you need to first sit down and understand what each piece on the board was is called and what they do. So that way, when you start playing, you understand what roles they play. The
Yep.
thing with chess is it is a game, excuse me, it is a game that relies heavily on logic. As soon as you let your emotions get the best of you, you lost the game. And to me, a, when a person plays chess and everything, that's just a small example when it comes down to war games. Because in war games, there will be some emotions, and later on, definitely, I'm going to enjoy when we explain more about the war games and everything. But when you coming into that aspect with just strictly emotions, and you don't look at it from the logic and intelligence that is required, you essentially have lost that game before it has even been played.
Facts. Facts. And it really, it took me years to understand why generals and admirals play chess. It took me years to understand why world leaders and politicians play chess. It took me years to understand why businessmen play chess. It took me years to understand it. You play it and you play it and you play it, and it teaches you. It teaches you to think strategically. It teaches you to analyze, identify, plan, and execute all of your moves, to predict your opponent's moves, to see your own moves, and then choose the wisest course of action and see multiple courses of action simultaneously. And by playing that game, it forces you, without even realizing, you subconsciously develop and bring those mindsets to your everyday activities. And that is why they play chess. And it took me years to understand that.
Facts, facts. And even for me, when I was playing it per se in grade school and high school, I just thought of it as just a game to relax, calm down, and, just play it run of the mill. But as I got older and I truly start to understand, as you pointed out, the meaning behind the game, now it's more so of this is a mental exercise to prep for any individual, but particularly men, who have to make rational decisions, and
Yes.
especially decisions that will bring in a lot of emotions.
I just noticed I just noticed we have a thumbs down. And I don't know when that happened, but a thumbs down. Wow.
Just some individual that, as just pointed out, thinking too much emotions and can't really see the forest for the trees. And that's fine because I'm not here to make friends and, so to speak, have everybody like me and everything. We're just here coming with the facts. And if you can't embrace it, there's other channels where you can run your emotions willy nilly.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, go and yeah. Yes. Absolutely. When
Yeah.
you lead with your emotions, you get the results that you get.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So moving on. So it says Egon Erwin Kish, who was also a dispatch runner during the First World War, argued, quote, he, Hitler, was a lance corporal for 4 years. Every old soldier knows that the rank of a lance corporal is only brief and temporary, only a preliminary to more senior non commissioned rank. Hundreds of thousands of men can be infantrymen, excuse me, and never make lance corporal. But a lance corporal who never makes sergeant in 4 years frontline service must be a very suspect type. Either he shirks commanding a squad or he is incompetent to do so. Now, I'm no expert as far as the progressions of military ranks, but if we were to take this at face value, it seems that, okay, once you became a dispatcher, you were supposed to move up pretty quickly, especially if you're doing the right things and networking. But according to this statement, if you've been a dispatcher for 4 years and haven't made any sort of advancement, at least to the next level, it tells other soldiers then that you just don't have the type of leadership skills to make a difference. So I definitely want to hear your interpretation of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more because he basically he was in an administrative position. Now, granted, he had to interact with the front lines because he was the line of communication. There were no radios, there were no satellites, so he was the line of communication, ferrying messages back and forth. Point here is he was in a position. He had an administrative role, so that is based around moving up through the ranks. You know, you're in a position where just being there, you're going to make rank. So for you to not make rank in that administrative role, that administrative position, there's something wrong with you. Either you're not playing the political game or you're so grossly incompetent that you could not earn a simple promotion. Now, granted, listen, there were people who were drafted, they fight a war, and then, they get their discharge as a corporal or even a private. But if you're in a combat role and you don't progress or you don't make some kind of rank, without having, there were people who they get a rank, something happens, they get busted down, they lose the rank, fine. But for you, for 4 years, and that's as far as he got in an administrative role, what I'm saying is he was on a track where just by showing up to work every day, eventually you're going to get a promotion. And he couldn't even earn that.
And this, once again, highlights the lackadaisical nature that Hitler had developed of himself even before he got involved in the war. And for the audience to kind of highlight what we're talking about as far as remaining lackadaisical, say, for example, in the corporate world, you know, you come to a job in your early 20s or even just late 20s, and the job is entry level. So you have a chance to build up the necessary skills within that position, but those skills also translate to other departments or other fields. And so for most companies, entry level positions are just there to get your foot in the door. They expect you, especially if you're a young person, to already have an idea of where you want to go and what steps you need to take to get there. But now, if you've been in this same position going on now 10 years, and even within this entry level, you couldn't even promote to, say, a team lead or even a manager, that says a lot about your personality.
That says a whole lot about you. Yeah, and it's funny because see, what I was trying to get at here by speaking that he was in an administrative position. From what I understand, especially during wartime, it's very easily to get a promotion if you're in a combat unit. If you're in an administrative position, it's also easy to get a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
So, seeing that he was not in a combat unit and he was stuck and he could not get a promotion, then that's telling me that was on him. It's, again, maybe I'm wrong, and you know what? I will leave that alone because I did not serve, and I have the highest respect for those who do serve in the military. But this yet again highlights a consistent theme that we are seeing throughout his entire life: failure, lack of success, not getting the job done, accomplishing very little in his life, or out and out rejection consistently throughout his life.
Absolutely. And that's really the hidden theme that we're seeing here, is the fact that Hitler had so many opportunities to go in the right direction, per se, especially in regards to self development and really putting his best foot forward. But 9 times out of 10 is because of his decision as to why he was just repeating the same negative cycle over and over and over. And then later on, when he gets a chance to self develop, unfortunately, he goes to a completely different direction that would later on backfire, which shows that he doesn't have that progression to think for the long term.
Exactly. And it's funny that you say that because that quality that you just spoke about reared its ugly head during the war. The inability to plan for the long term. As much as he thought that he was strategically, he actually didn't. Because there's a difference between planning the future of your country and making proper strategic strategic military decisions looking for the long term. And in that specific regard, he was woefully lacking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the next excerpt says this. It says Sergeant Max Amann recommended Hitler for officer training. However, Fritz Weidmann, Hitler's regimental adjutant, rejected the idea as he considered Hitler lacked leadership qualities. He wrote in his memoirs, The Man Who Wanted to Command, 1964, quote, by military standards, Hitler really didn't at that time have potential for promotion. I'm disregarding the fact that he wouldn't have cut a specially good figure as an officer in peacetime. His posture was sloppy, and when he was asked a question, his answer would be anything but short in a soldier like fashion. Yeah. Says he didn't hold his head straight, it was usually sloping towards his left shoulder. Now, all that doesn't matter in wartime, but ultimately, a man must have leadership qualities if you're doing the right thing when you promote him to be a non commissioned officer. So, what I find interesting is, once again, this highlights how he is conducting himself. And to me, okay, so I'm gonna drop another little bait, but I think you will know where I'm going with this. How you carry yourself, which includes your attire, can tell many individuals your characteristics without you even uttering a single word. And this excerpt here highlights what we're talking about.
You know, that is a consistent consistent theme amongst the military. How you carry yourself, how you conduct yourself, your uniform, the uniformity of your uniform, its cleanliness, its presentation, how it looks, they're all a representation and a reflection of who you are. And think about it subconsciously when you look at a person in your everyday day-to-day interactions. If a person has clown shoes on their feet and their clothes are sloppy and they're baggy and they're disjointed and they're sloppy, subconsciously you're looking at the person, you don't take them seriously because they look
Mm-hmm.
sloppy and disjointed and maybe even unkempt. And subconsciously you understand that that is a reflection of who that person is. So when a person is neat and presentable, it it presents a different image of that person in your mind. And subconsciously, again, you pick up on that, whether you know it or not. That is why certain people can be looked at in a certain way, and then they'll claim that they're being profiled. But could it be that you drew that attention upon yourself by looking a certain way? And these people who look a certain way, when they open their mouths and they speak and they now express themselves, are they lacking the ability to express themselves in a clear, coherent manner? So,
But Paul, you
yes.
shouldn't judge me by how I dress or how I conduct myself. You should just give me the position just based on me just applying for it.
Well, here's the thing, Brother Sigma Jones. If you walk into a lawyer's office and the lawyer is wearing clown shoes and baggy jeans and clothes that look like his big brother's clothes, let's see how seriously you take that lawyer. You walk into a doctor's office and he's wearing large, sloppy, baggy clothes with holes in them, and he's speaking like he has a third grade level of education. Let's see how seriously you take that individual. So then apply that nonsensical argument to those professions.
Ooh, let me move on before we get deep down the rabbit hole. But hopefully the audience that listening in, you get the gist of what we're trying to say here. Hitler highlights at this point in time, they felt some of the soldiers felt like, hey, Hitler does have qualities that could make him an officer and that he should go to officer training. But even a person who is an officer, just examining him from the head down, it was like even during time of peace, he just does not have the makings of an officer, just based off of how he was dressed and his posture, which, any man who has confidence in himself and confidence in his ability, you're going to notice that there's a way, even when he's not trying to be a peacock, hint, hint, he carries himself so that people can look at him and be like, you know what? That guy there, he's pretty good. I haven't even spoken to him yet, but he seemed like a guy who's approachable, somebody who is sociable and everything. Let's get to know him. But If you already have this mindset of the world is out to get you, yeah, even the slightest posture, in this case, Hitler's head sloping in some direction, left side, tells even a small child, this dude got issues.
You know, when when you walk into a room, what's the first thing that you do? You look around the room because you're looking at people. And you can look at people and you can look how they carry themselves. Are they slumped over? Are they hunched over? Or do they have that confidence? And we all know, at least we should know, confidence is attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that person have an angry chip on their shoulder? Do they have a scowl on their face? Are they are they dressed in a manner that reflects a certain mindset and mentality? And we all know what it is. Okay? So when you look at a woman, is she dressed slutty or is she dressed classy? Is she dressed trashy or is she dressed sexy? Is she dressed for business or is she dressed for casual wear? Does she have the confidence or does she not? Is she moving and conducting herself as a lady with grace and femininity, or is she moving and carrying herself as a wanton so and so? And I'll leave that at that. So, that argument of, oh, but you shouldn't judge me by how I look or how I dress. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Let's continue on with that particular fallacy. Yeah, right.
All right, so the next excerpt says this: Luther Machen, the author of The Hidden Hitler, provides a different reason why Hitler refused to become an officer. Quote, why did Hitler remain a lance corporal throughout the war? His toadying to higher authority, if not his efficiency, should have earned him a promotion. We're told that he was offered it but refused. It would probably be more correct to say that he could not bring himself to accept. As a non com, he would sooner or later have been obliged to give up what had hitherto enabled him to tolerate war service so well. Ernest Smitch, his other faithful partners, a relatively safe existence in the near echelon, and possibly also a tolerance of the homosexual tendencies he could not have pursued as a non commissioned officer. Now, I'm not going to even talk about the last statement as far as his tendencies and everything.
Right.
What I'm getting at here is, which again just points back to his lackadaisical mindset. Even when the opportunity presented himself in front of Hitler, he just did not bring himself to take it on. And to be honest, this is just Sigmund Jones' opinion, the reason why he would turn down such opportunities is because he hates being uncomfortable. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, excellent point. Because when you tell me a person in the military turns down a promotion, we're not talking a colonel being offered or being promoted to general or a major being promoted up to a colonel. We're talking a lance corporal turning down a promotion during a war. Who does that? And this is a person who supposedly was initially recommended for OCS and who himself supposedly had visions of grandeur. Now he's turning down a promotion. That's a major, major red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And he was comfortable. where he was and didn't want the responsibilities and didn't want the hard work and the responsibilities that come along with becoming an NCO and moving higher. With more with higher rank comes more responsibilities, more effort, more hard work. And at this point, I'm sure he understood the social aspects and the social interaction that comes with it. See, as a corporal, he could just blend into the background. He can't do
Mm-hmm.
that in a position of authority now. So apparently, that person, that officer who turned down his candidacy selection for OCS made the right call. He was not suitable to become an officer.
Yeah, most certainly not. To me, it just highlights that this was an individual who complained and complained and complained about his lot in life and some of the issues that he perceives. That's the key word. He perceives is happening in his life. But then when an opportunity comes for him to, so to speak, level up and get him in the right direction, he just rather stay in his little corner and continue to moan and groan. I'm gonna leave it there because my co-host would know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, we're just gonna leave that right where it is. Let people come to their own conclusions on that.
Yeah. All right, moving along. It says Hitler's regiment was at the Battle of Somme, and on the 2nd of October 1916, Hitler was wounded in the left thigh when a shell exploded in the dispatch runner's dugout, killing and wounding several of them. His close friend, Ernest Schmitz, was also injured in the blast. After treatment in a field hospital, he spent almost 2 months in the Red Cross hospital in Belitz, near Berlin. He was appalled to hear men in the hospital bragging about how they managed to inflict minor injuries to themselves to make sure they could escape from the Western Front. In January of 1917, Adolf Hitler wrote to the regiment's adjutant, Fritz Weidmann, for permission to return, quote, to the 16th Reserve Infantry Regiment and serve with his former comrades. Hitler also wrote to Sergeant Max Amann to see if he could use his influence to be reassigned to his regiment, his elective family. Hitler later recalled that his regiment had taught him, quote, the glorious meaning of a male community. Hitler was allowed to rejoin his regiment on the 5th of March, 1917. So, what we can see here is obviously this is his first battle injury. Thankfully, he survived because it was just pointed out earlier that most dispatch runners have a 45% chance of surviving. And so, miraculously, he was able to survive this. And that he was already trying to get back onto the front lines. Not so much as to level up and, maybe earn his promotions and everything, but rather he just wanted to be around, his people and so to speak, his new family, which I find very interesting in these two excerpts.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. But seeing consistently here, he also see Adolf to me is as I've said before, he's a dichotomy of mind and emotion because he wants to lead, but he doesn't want to do anything necessary to become an officer, and he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to be any effective leader of men. And he got injured, and then he wants to return to the front, but he doesn't want to actually fight or lead men in battle. I don't know. It's a lot going on there, man. Man. As I said before, man, he makes a brilliant case study. A lot of things going on there with him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're still only touching the iceberg. Like the childhood that he's been brought up and now up to this point in the war where, his life could be gone in a single second or whatnot. He is almost like he's being selfish. And what I mean by that is, most soldiers would rather, when they're injured and they spend time in the hospital, they want to get back on the front lines so they can help out their comrades in regard to continuing to fight.
Right.
Whereas it seemed here with Hitler, he just wanted to be out there just to have something to do. He could care less as far as, if some of his comrades get killed or not, which again just highlights his not psycho, sociopathic thinking that's going on.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So the next excerpt says Hitler's regiment took part in the fighting at Passchendaele in July, but the following month they moved to Alsace. At the end of September, he went on an 18-day leave to Berlin. Hitler later commented, quote, "Towards the end of 1917, it seemed as if we had got over the worst phases of moral depression at the front. After the Russian collapse, the whole army recovered its courage and hope, and all were gradually becoming more and more convinced that the struggle would end in our favor. We could sing once again. The ravens were ceasing to croak. Faith in the future of the fatherland was once more in the ascendant. This inspiring thought now became dominant in the minds of millions at the front and encouraged them to look forward with confidence to the spring of 1918. It was quite obvious that the enemy was in a state of depression." The next excerpt says, in April 1918, Hitler's regiment took part in the spring offensive. It was decided to attack Allied forces at 3 points along the front line: Arras, Lys, and Aisne. At first, the German army had considerable success and came close to making a decisive breakthrough. However, Allied forces managed to halt the German advance at the Marne in June of 1918. After suffering 168,000 casualties during this battle, the exhausted German soldiers were forced to retreat. So what we see here, it seems in the latter part of 1917 that there were confidence starting to brew for the German front. It looks like they were starting to get the upper hand on the Allied forces and were starting to make advances of pushing them back towards the west. But then comes the spring of 1918, and they're continuing to push and everything. But then going into the summer months, the Allied forces start to kick back, and the next thing you know, the Germans are going backwards, especially at the Battle of Marne, where they had 168,000 casualties. So again, it just highlights the trench warfare where, one moment you're gaining ground, you're gaining yards and everything, and then the next moment, costly mistakes is starting to make you go backwards and push you further backwards. Your thoughts,
Now,
good sir?
um, yes, absolutely consistent theme. You know, my thoughts are the parallels, the parallels between this example, and a certain demographic are as plain as day, and you see the same results. The difference is, the difference is, these people collectively learned from their mistakes and changed their thinking, went in a different direction. A certain demographic has not changed a single thing, which is why it is 50 years on since their last major event, this certain demographic, and they're having the same exact conversations and arguing over the same foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
When you continually make mistakes and you suffer setbacks and failures, you have to learn to go in a different direction. You have to learn from your mistakes and go in a different direction. If not, you're going to keep repeating the same mistakes and getting the same results. As they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly, yet expecting a different result.
Absolutely. To me, it just proves the old adage that is just repeated time and time again, which is ironic. History repeats itself if you don't learn from history.
Absolutely. And when you don't learn from history, as you said, it repeats itself. So when you don't learn from history. You know, the thing that boggles the mind is, well, it doesn't boggle the mind, but it's the ways in which the mind, when saddled with failure, how some minds can form themselves to say, okay, what can I do differently for success? Whereas other minds say, okay, someone else is causing me success. I'm not going to change anything that I'm doing. I'm I'm just going to point the finger and blame someone else because it's not me. Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah. Or you have individuals that feels like, okay, well, if we just continue to do this and we keep telling ourselves that we keep doing this and doing this, eventually we're gonna get pay dirt. Even even though you can show them that no matter how many times you try to push in that certain direction, you're not going to get what you think you should get. In fact, a good chance is you get something even worser. But those individuals feel like, well, we just need to continue hitting it this way and keep going until we hit pay dirt. And with those type of thinking individuals, which Hitler highlights it, you just have to let them be. But see, the thing is this: when they let Hitler be, this man came and become a dictator, where now his the is almost like at the time he could just press a single button and a whole nation could be rattled just by anything he utmost says. Whereas right now, you have groups that feel like just the slightest misstep of talking about them suddenly paints you in the bad picture, which, like I said before, just highlights history repeating itself.
Over, over and over and over again. You know, it's funny as you say. It's a comfort and a reliance on repeating the same failed, useless actions that accomplish absolutely nothing. And no matter how you point them out with science, logic, and history, that these actions do not work and they will not yield results, they double down and they double down, and they double down, and they attack you for highlighting the failures of their actions. Wrap your head around that. it's, it reminds me this certain demographic is Sisyphus. That's who they are. This certain demographic is Sisyphus. They are forever doomed to push that rock up the hill, and when they get halfway there or three-quarters of the way there, the rock falls right back down to the bottom of the hill, and they have to start all over again every single day until eternity. That is what that certain demographic is. They're Sisyphus.
Yeah, and it's just sad that you just watch from afar and you just see them continuously try to get that same rock over the hill with the same tools that are just so outdated. But somehow, some way, if you just keep believing and you just keep praying, you'll eventually get that rock over the hill. But I digress. Whole different subject. Let's get back to our friend Hitler. All right, so we're almost done. It says here on the 4th of August, 1918, Adolf Hitler received the prestigious Iron Cross First Class. He was nominated by a Jewish officer, Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann. He wrote, quote, "As a dispatch runner, he has shown cold-blooded courage and exemplary boldness. Under conditions of great peril, when all the communication lines were cut, the untiring and fearless activity of Hitler made it possible for important messages to go through." But in October of 1918, Hitler was blinded in a British mustard gas attack. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, quote, "On a hill south of Warwick, in the evening of October 13th, we were subjected for several hours to a heavy bombardment with gas bombs, which continued throughout the night with more or less intensity. About midnight, a number of us were put out of action, some forever. Towards morning, I also began to feel pain. It increased with every quarter of an hour, and about 7 o'clock, my eyes were scorching as I staggered back and delivered the last dispatch I was destined to carry in this war. A few hours later, my eyes were glowing coals, and all darkness was around me." It says Adolf Hitler was sent to a military hospital and gradually recovered his sight. While he was in the hospital, Germany surrendered. Quote, "Everything went black before my eyes. I tottered and groped my way back to the ward, threw myself on my bunk, and dug my burning head into my blanket and pillow. So it had all been in vain. In vain all the sacrifices and privations. In vain the hours in which, with mortal fear clutching at our hearts, we nevertheless did our duty. In vain the death of 2 million who died. Had they died for us? Did all of this happen only so that a gang of wretched criminals could lay hands on the fatherland? I knew that all was lost. Only fools, liars, and criminals could hope for mercy from the enemy. In these nights, hatred grew in me. Hatred for those responsible for this deed. Miserable and degenerate criminals. The more I tried to achieve clarity on the monstrous events in this hour, the more the shame of indignation and disgrace burned my brow. Hitler went into a state of deep depression and had periods when he could not stop crying. He spent most of his time towards the hospital wall, refusing to talk to anyone. Once again, Hitler's efforts had ended in failure.
Yeah, Hitler had a lot of disdain for the Kaiser and for the upper echelon of the military. But it's funny, once again, I have to draw the parallel to a group of people. I have to draw the parallel to a group of people who suffer consistent failure, but yet they somehow manage to move in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
History is an amazing teacher if you study it. But you see, you have to study all of it, not what's comfortable to you or what fits your narrative or your agenda.
Facts.
Yeah. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and this is pretty much the benchmark up to this point to where, like I said, from the first part one up until now, we could clearly see that Hitler had many opportunities to right the ship for his life. And we're talking about from the likes of, selling his paintings to earn some money that he could later on invest, up until now, where he has had opportunities to go into officer training, which that in and of itself, you know, any individual who's coming from a poor class and joins the military and goes through officer training, that easily puts them at the very least middle class. Those opportunities he could have easily gotten for it, but he willfully, and this is the key word, he willfully let them go. And even now, these last two excerpts that highlight, you know, he survives a gas attack, which I can only imagine, your eyes burning so that you're temporarily blind and, your eyes are shut for days on end. And by the time you recover, the war is over. And the war ends because your side decides it was just best to give in to the enemy, his words, rather than just continue to fight. And so now, once again, he's casting the blame on the bureaucrats, so to speak. And Evan Duncan, he pretty much highlighted this. So Hitler hated the bougies. Pretty much. And and once again, he just feels like, and I can only imagine, he's in the hospital, or say we're both in the hospital and we're trying to recover from our injuries and everything. And all of a sudden, you have this random guy who, at first, he looks fine and everything, but all of a sudden, he's having these outbursts talking about we lost the dang war because of this group or that group and everything. And you're asking yourself, an insane asylum. But
No, I'm just laughing because you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. See, my thing is this: you reach a point where you tire of banging your head up against a wall. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. So I can lead the individual to knowledge and rational thinking, but I can't think for them.
what's crazy though with that analogy is that you have individuals, you lead them to the water, fresh flowing water, but they want you to drink that water for them. And it's like, bro, all this fresh flowing water, you're thirsty, you're on the verge of dying of hydration, but you want me to get this water for you. Oh, boy.
Yeah, I don't get it, and I'm done. I'm done, and I've walked away from that, and that's why my mindset is what my mindset is. You can lead a person to knowledge and rational thinking, but you cannot think for them. So when you present, when you when you hold a mirror to a person and you show them their own thoughts, words, and actions, and it's nothing but self-perpetuating failure, and they still insist upon continuing the same actions, you are left with one course of action: walk away, no longer engage.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing that back to one Adolf, with all of his issues and his problems, he still somehow managed to learn something along the way, which will be dealt as we go on further when he met the man who groomed him. And but the point here is, with all his issues, he somehow managed to elevate his thinking and
Oh, yeah.
pursue a different course in life. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one thing I will highlight here, as we take a break from this side of Hitler, and later on when we come back, we'll get more into his political development, how he's able to manipulate his way into the upper managements and everything, as well as the people who will become part of his inner circle. One thing I want to highlight from part one, part two, and now part three that we just finished tonight and morning at your time, Mr. Bryant,
Mhm.
I will say this, and this is mainly just a hint for the individuals today who are so heavily involved in the world of politics and social politics and everything. These early years of Hitler highlights the hidden truths of classism
Yes.
and No matter how you look at it from his perspective or from the outside perspective, the bottom line is this: Hitler had many opportunities to move up in classism. But because he had some weird upbringings, and I'm using that lightly, weird upbringings, and because of the fact that he did not take opportunities, the right type of opportunities that would have probably altered his ways of thinking just a little bit, or even just altered, his trajectory in life, highlights why he remained in that position, which, shows you this is how classism works. It all comes down to your mindset.
Exactly, because it's all about classism, and all is mental because mental is supreme.
Mm-hmm.
And all obstacles and goals can be overcome if you have the proper mindset, if you put your focus in the right place. So, to use the earlier analogy, a high rise has to be built on a solid foundation. You cannot build a high rise on a foundation of quicksand. So it's all about mindset. Mindset conquers all. That is the answer to any and all problems and any and all issues. It's not about solutions or one quick hit answer looking for some form of entertainment. Literally, all the answers to all of your problems and all of your barriers, the answers are within. Look within. Elevate your thinking, plan, identify, and execute. It's all about your mindset.
True words, couldn't have said it better myself. So, this concludes the first three-part series for Hitler's development. And believe me, we, like I said before, we're just barely touching the iceberg. We still have so much years we have to catch up for Hitler before the first bombing of Poland. And even then, we also have to talk about the guys who will help him to become more influential. We just mentioned tonight Rudolf Hess and his first encounter with Hitler during the First World War. Wait until we get into the likes of Heinrich Himmler and oh my goodness, his name just escapes me. The main commander of the Luftwaffe,
Oh, Hermann Goering,
Herbal Goering. Oh, and also too Joseph Goebbels as well.
Joseph
Those two,
Goebbels, the
yep,
Minister of Propaganda.
yep. These individuals. Now, don't get me wrong. We're going to see them pop up more as we delve into Hitler's development. But wait until we start to talk about these individuals by themselves, their own episodes and all. And then you're really going to start to see, wow, these individuals literally saw a golden opportunity with Hitler. And each and every one of them took advantage while it was wide open. That's why there's a series on Netflix. Um, I don't know if it's still on there or not, but
It
you
is.
could,
It is. It
yes,
is.
the inner circles of Hitler. I highly recommend. If you want to get an early jump on what we're going to be talking about, that just gives a brief look into that development. Whereas in this series, we're going to break it down person by person and then bring it all back together.
Absolutely. Hermann Goering, who was the commanding officer of the Luftwaffe. Heinrich Himmler, commander of the SS. Uh, his not really his second in command, but one of his top generals, Reinhard Heydrich,
Mm-hmm.
architect of the final solution. Um, Adolf Eichmann, Reinhard Heydrich's second in command and right hand officer. So he was in charge of the logistics of the final solution. Um, Rudolf Hess, oh man, Albert Speer, who was Hitler's physical architect.
Mm-hmm.
So many names, so many names. Of course, Minister, Minister Goebbels, you know. But it's funny. The one name who gets left out, and that is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel.
Yep.
Rommel, not a Nazi, and Rommel was the best tank commander. In fact, Rommel may have been the best field commander in the entire war between him and Patton. But he was a soldier and he was a patriot and he did his job and he did not like the Nazis. He did not, he had no problem with Hitler and he had no problem with rebuilding the country. But when he became a fascist and the way that he was waging the war, okay, he's a patriot, he will wage the war, he will do his duty. But as Hitler's decisions became increasingly and increasingly emotional and erratic and where the direction of the war was headed, he said, okay, I've done enough. Even as a patriot and a soldier, I have a duty to my people and to my nation. And Rommel actually became one of the first people in the military to conduct an assassination attempt against Adolf Hitler. Because there were, correct me, either 21 or 38, the exact number escapes me, of assassination attempts by the military against Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, I want to say I have to look it back up, but it's definitely in the 30s. They said Hitler, from the time that he got into the Nazi regime up until his death, I believe they said there were 36 attempts
On his
at
life.
trying. Yeah, yeah. And what's crazy, after each attempt, Hitler really felt like he was of divine intervention. So,
It's funny because Hitler was a very well-read individual, and he read a lot of Al Albert Pike's work. He read Madame Blavatsky's work. Um, he read a lot of material from a lot of sources, and was heavily into the esoteric studies. And there were a lot of things that the German military was involved in, things that you and I will discuss off air, but a lot of names. And again, we're only talking about Germany. We haven't even got to the other players, but there is so much. There's so much to learn. There's so much to learn from the decisions, the men who made these decisions, and what shaped them to get to that point to change the world.
no doubt, my friend, no doubt. So, that would conclude tonight's episode. And like I said, we're definitely just putting a pin here on Hitler's early development. We will definitely come back, but we're then going to be talking about other world leaders who will start to build their own developments too. But with that said, my good friend and co-host, would you like to give any departing words or thoughts on tonight's show?
No, just that it's a I'm having so much fun doing this series and exploring the human nature of these gentlemen and highlighting their histories and helping people to gain a window into an insight that these these individuals were people and that they were human and that there were very human motivations behind the things that they did, and that a lot, if not most, of the history you have been taught and things that you hold as absolute fact were either incorrect or out and out lies. And again, we can argue the morality of war at a different time. We are looking at this from a perspective of dispassionate objectivity and looking at things in all of their merits and their negatives from a dispassionate objectivity standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing too I want the audience to understand is, if anything, just put yourself in these characters' mindset and in their shoes, because that's what we're trying to do here. You know, we're just getting these information from firsthand and secondhand information. It really requires you to just take take a moment and just really think from their point of view, the characters and the figureheads we're going to be talking about. That way, you will start to kind of understand their ways of thinking, how they felt about certain issues, um, as far as why they went that certain direction. The importance here is, like we mentioned before, just putting your emotions aside for just once and just look to see and understand what were these individuals about. Because that's the thing. Excuse me. You know, when we read up history, and especially when we hear it from one source of history or one sided history, we could easily have our thought process clouded and, so to speak, hindered because we're only looking at it from a person's opinion, which, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Right.
But the thing is, if you really want to grasp the history and you really want to grasp the lessons behind those histories, you need to be able to not only look at both sides of it, but you also need to get yourself in the shoes of those characters. That's when you will truly understand what this history is all about.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, with that said, I want to thank the audience that were able to listen in on tonight, and definitely appreciate you guys listening, taking the time to delve into history and everything. Um, Definitely, as you both know, me and Paul Bryan, World War II is one of our favorite subjects. You know, we can go days on end talking about this stuff. We even just send emails, just going back and forth, talking about ideas of why certain individuals did this or did that, and just bounce off each other. But for the audience here, this is an opportunity for you to look at history, understand it, and in a lot of cases, apply it to your personal life and see what can you do to put yourself in a better position to understand these people and maybe even apply their ways of thinking the right way, but you will get to appreciate that type of history. So definitely want to thank you guys, and as always, I want to thank my co-host for taking the time out of his day to continue on with the series. We will definitely be planning the next one coming up soon, and, and for those that are already history junkies, you can definitely chime in, give your thoughts. You can send me emails as well, as far as giving your opinions on some of these characters and all. I definitely would love to hear these feedbacks. And me and Paul Bryan, if they're good, we'll even bring them up and kind of discuss them even further on these subjects. But with that said, I am Sigma Jones. Thank you for listening in to the War Room. Until next time.